Ed Sullivan stood outside Janis Joplin's dressing room, listening to the sound of breaking glass from inside. It was March 15, 1969, and Janis Joplin was scheduled to perform in exactly 30 minutes. But from the sounds coming through that door, the crashes, the cursing, the bottles hitting walls, Ed was beginning to realize that Janis Joplin might not make it to the stage at all. His stage manager knocked harder. "Miss Joplin, we need to do a sound check. Miss Joplin." The door flew open. Janis stood there with a bottle of Southern Comfort in one hand and a cigarette in the other, her eyes unfocused, her speech slightly slurred. "Sound check. Baby. I am the sound check." Ed felt his stomach drop. He'd been warned about this. Everyone in the music industry had warned him. Janis Joplin doesn't just drink before performances. She drinks during performances. She drinks after performances. She's never sober, and trying to get her sober would be like trying to stop the ocean. But Ed had hoped, that for one night, for the Ed Sullivan Show, Janis would pull it together. He'd been wrong. And now he had a choice: cancel the performance and deal with the fallout, or let a visibly intoxicated woman onto live television and hope nothing went catastrophically wrong. Before we dive into this incredible story, hit that subscribe button, because what you're about to witness is the night when the rawest, most unfiltered voice in rock and roll walked onto Ed Sullivan's carefully controlled stage and proved that sometimes the most powerful performances come from people who refuse to be anything other than exactly who they are, even when who they are is falling apart. To understand why Janis Joplin being drunk was such a crisis for Ed Sullivan, you need to understand that Janis Joplin's relationship with alcohol wasn't casual or recreational. It was fundamental to who she was as a performer and as a person. Janis had grown up in Port Arthur, Texas, a girl who didn't fit in anywhere, who was mocked for being ugly, who was voted ugliest man on campus in a cruel college yearbook poll. She'd learned early that the world was hostile and that pain was something you carried with you everywhere. Music had been her escape, but it had also been her trap, because Janis discovered that she couldn't access the raw emotional place her singing came from unless she was drunk. Stone cold sober, she was too self-conscious, too aware of her own vulnerability, too aware of all the years of rejection and mockery. The girl who'd been called ugly, who'd been laughed at, who'd been told she'd never amount to anything, that girl was still there under the surface. And that girl couldn't sing in front of people without armor. Southern Comfort became that armor. With enough of it in her system, Janis could open herself up completely, could let out the pain and rage and longing that made her voice unlike anything else in music. She could become the person on stage that she could never be in real life: fearless, powerful, unashamed. But the price of that transformation was steep and getting steeper. People who knew Janis in her early days in San Francisco had watched the drinking escalate from recreational to necessary to constant. She'd wake up drinking, she'd perform drinking, she'd pass out drinking, and when people tried to intervene, tried to suggest she slow down or get help, Janis would say the same thing every time: "This is who I am. This is how I work. You want Janis Joplin the star? This is what it costs." By 1969, Janis Joplin was the biggest female rock star in America. "Piece of My Heart" had made her a household name. Her performances at Woodstock and Monterey Pop had become legendary. But everyone in the industry knew that Janis was burning herself out. The drinking was getting worse. The drugs were getting heavier. People close to her were starting to whisper that she wouldn't live to 30. Ed Sullivan's bookers had been pushing to get Janis on the show for months. She represented something the show needed: authenticity, raw emotion, the voice of the counterculture. But Ed had been resistant. He'd seen footage of Janis performing, and what he'd seen had made him deeply uncomfortable. She wasn't just a singer, she was someone having an emotional breakdown in public, over and over again, and calling it entertainment. But Cosmic Blues was climbing the charts, and CBS needed young viewers, so the booking had been made with very specific conditions. Janis would perform one song. She would be coherent. She would not be visibly intoxicated on stage. Her manager had promised that Janis understood the requirements and would comply. But Janis Joplin's manager had been lying, because Janis Joplin didn't comply with requirements. She barely complied with the laws of physics. The afternoon rehearsal should have been Ed's first warning. Janis had shown up 2 hours late, already drinking, and had run through "Try Just a Little Bit Harder" in a way that was technically acceptable, but emotionally absent. She'd been going through the motions, saving the real performance for when it mattered. Or so Ed had hoped. Now 30 minutes before showtime, Ed was looking at a woman who could barely stand straight. Her band, the Cosmic Blues Band, was in the green room looking nervous. They'd performed with drunk Janis before, but drunk Janis on the Ed Sullivan Show, in front of 50 million people, was something different. Ed made a decision. He walked into Janis's dressing room and closed the door behind him. "Miss Joplin, I don't think you're in any condition to perform tonight." Janis looked at him with eyes that were struggling to focus. "Ed Sullivan, the man himself, you don't think I can perform, baby? I perform better like this. This is how I access it. This is how I get to the place where the music lives." "You're intoxicated," Ed said flatly. "I can't put you on live television in this condition. What if you fall? What if you can't remember the lyrics? What if you say something inappropriate?" Janis laughed, and it was a hard, bitter sound. "Ed, my whole life is inappropriate. That's why people love me. They don't want some polished, perfect performer. They want the truth. And the truth is messy and drunk and falling apart, just like me." Ed looked at this woman who was 26 years old and looked 40, whose talent was being consumed by the same demons that fed it. "I'm canceling your performance. CBS will send you your fee, but you're not going on my stage like this." Janis stood up, swaying slightly. "You can't cancel me. I'm Janis Joplin. You need me more than I need you, and I'm going on that stage whether you like it or not." Ed's stage manager appeared at the door. "We've got 15 minutes. If we're canceling, we need to fill the time." Ed looked at Janis, at the defiance in her eyes even as she could barely stand. He made a calculation. Letting her perform might be a disaster, but canceling her would definitely be a disaster. At least if she performed, there was a chance she'd pull it together. "Fine," Ed said, "you perform. But if you fall, if you can't finish the song, if anything goes wrong, this is on you. Not me. Not CBS. You." Janis smiled. "Baby, everything that goes wrong in my life is on me. I'm used to it." March 15, 1969, 9:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Ed Sullivan introduced Janis Joplin with his standard formal delivery, giving no indication of the crisis that had just been averted. "Ladies and gentlemen, Janis Joplin and the Cosmic Blues Band." Janis walked onto that stage and Ed watched from the wings with his heart in his throat. She was visibly unsteady. Her walk wasn't quite straight, but she made it to the microphone, grabbed it like she was grabbing a lifeline, and the music started. For the first 30 seconds, Ed was convinced this was going to be the disaster he'd feared. Janis seemed disconnected, her timing slightly off, her voice not quite finding the notes. But then something happened that nobody could have predicted. The alcohol, the pain, the self-destruction, all of it coalesced into something transcendent. Janis stopped performing and started testifying. Her voice, that incredible voice that sounded like it was being torn out of her throat, filled the studio with a power that was almost physical. She wasn't singing "Try Just a Little Bit Harder" anymore. She was living it, bleeding it, offering up every ounce of pain she'd ever felt as a gift to anyone willing to receive it. Every word came out like a confession, like she was revealing secrets she'd been carrying her whole life and could finally let go of for just these 3 minutes. The studio audience, which had been politely attentive, leaned forward. Some people looked uncomfortable, like they were witnessing something too private to be broadcast. Others looked transfixed, unable to look away. This wasn't entertainment in the traditional sense. This was something rawer and more honest than most of them had ever seen on television. Janis moved across the stage with a desperate energy that was both beautiful and frightening. The microphone cord wrapped around her like a chain she was trying to break free from, her whole body channeling the song in ways that went beyond choreography or performance technique. She looked like she might collapse at any moment, like the sheer force of what she was expressing might be too much for her physical form to contain. But she didn't collapse. She transcended. The drunkenness that Ed had feared would ruin the performance became part of the performance, the vulnerability visible in every gesture making the emotion more real. When the song ended, there was a moment of absolute silence. The studio audience didn't know how to respond. They'd expected a rock performance. They'd witnessed something closer to an exorcism. Then the applause started, and it built and built until it was a standing ovation. Janis walked off stage past Ed Sullivan without looking at him. She was crying, her mascara running, her whole body shaking from the effort of what she'd just done. Ed started to say something, but Janis kept walking straight to her dressing room, straight to another bottle. The CBS switchboard lit up immediately, not with complaints, with calls from people who wanted to know who that woman was, where they could hear more of her music, how they could see her perform live. Janis Joplin's raw, unfiltered performance had done exactly what Ed had feared and hoped. It had been unforgettable. The next morning, Ed received a call from CBS. "Ed, we need to talk about last night. Janis Joplin was clearly intoxicated on our broadcast. We're getting questions from affiliates, from sponsors. We need to address this." Ed's response surprised them. Address what? She performed brilliantly. The audience loved her. If being drunk is what it takes for Janis Joplin to access that level of emotion, then maybe we should stop judging how people create art and just be grateful they're creating it. But privately, Ed was haunted by what he'd seen. Because Janis Joplin's performance had been brilliant and tragic, the same self-destruction that made her performance powerful was the thing that was killing her. And everyone in that studio had watched it happening and called it entertainment. Janis Joplin died on October 4, 1970, 18 months after that Ed Sullivan Show performance. She was 27 years old. The official cause was a heroin overdose. But everyone who knew her understood that Janis had been dying slowly for years, using alcohol and drugs to access the pain that made her performances transcendent, until the pain and the substances consumed her completely. Ed Sullivan never invited Janis back on his show, not because of the drinking, but because after that performance, Ed understood that watching Janis Joplin perform was like watching someone bleed. It was powerful and it was real, but it was also profoundly sad. And Ed didn't know if putting that on television was an act of artistic courage or exploitation. Years later, in 1973, Ed was asked about Janis in an interview. "She was the most talented and the most troubled performer I ever had on my show." Ed said, "That night she was drunk. Everyone could see it. But she was also brilliant. And I still don't know if I did the right thing letting her perform. I gave the world an incredible piece of art, but I also participated in the spectacle of someone's self-destruction. I'm not sure those things can be separated." The footage of Janis Joplin's Ed Sullivan Show performance still exists. You can watch it online, and if you know what to look for, you can see the unsteadiness in her walk, the slight slur in her speech between songs. But you can also see the transcendence, the moment when Janis Joplin stopped being a person and became pure emotion. It's uncomfortable to watch, because it's so raw, so unfiltered, so obviously someone in pain turning that pain into art. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button. Janis Joplin was told she was too drunk to perform, went on anyway, and created one of the most powerful performances in television history. Have you ever had to choose between stopping someone from self-destructing and letting them be fully themselves, even if being fully themselves was dangerous? Share your story in the comments below.